Tariffs are basically a tax on goods that are imported into a country. Often what happens then is that the company that's importing the goods passes those costs on to consumers so that they'll pay higher prices for the goods that are being affected by the tariffs.
We are going to have so many business moving back into our country. And remember, again, the word tariff. We're going to protect our people and our businesses, and we're going to protect our country with tariffs. And you got a little indication of that yesterday with what happened with a very strong country. Colombia is traditionally a very, very strong-willed country. If they don't make their product in America, then very simply they should have to pay a tariff, which will bring in trillions of dollars into our treasury from countries that never paid us 10 cents. We're not going to let that happen. We're not going to let them destroy our country. In the words of President McKinley, who is the tariff king, the protective system invokes the highest law of nature, that a self-preservation, and that is self-preservation. There is every reason founded in justice why the American producer should in every way be favored against a foreign producer whose products compete with his. This is our natural market. We have made it. We have made it at enormous cost, capital, and exertion. And think of this. And we did that through exertion and brain and muscle and guts and stamina. We preserved it against foreign wars and domestic conflicts at great sacrifice of men and women. The foreign producer has contributed nothing to the growth or development of this country. So if you want to share with the citizens of the United States our home market, then you must pay for the privilege of doing it. In other words, you have to pay for the privilege of coming into our country, taking our jobs, taking our product, destroying our countries. We mentioned North Carolina, the furniture business, what they've done to these great artisans. I used to go down to North Carolina all the time to buy furniture for hotels that I was building. And they had the most incredible artisans. That whole thing was wiped out by China mostly, but others, and just wiped out. But it's going to come back. It's going to come roaring back. It's all going to come roaring back. We're going to put tariffs on outside countries and outside people that really mean us harm. They want to, well, they mean us harm, but they basically want to make their country good. Look at what others do. China's a tremendous tariff maker, and India and Brazil and so many countries. And so we're not going to let that happen any longer, because we're going to put America first. Always put America first. That's what's going to happen. We're going to establish.
So why has President Trump decided to implement tariffs early on into his second term? Well, the president sees it as necessary in addressing major concerns facing America, top of the list being the trade deficit, illegal immigration, and the flow of illicit drugs into the country.
Trump says the tariffs on Mexico and Canada are to stop illegal immigration and the fentanyl trade, and that the tariffs on China are specifically to try to stop the production of fentanyl.
The president says he's protecting and boosting the U.S. economy, blaming those countries for enabling illegal drugs and undocumented migrants to flow into the U.S., accusations they reject.
Trump went on to say the tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country.
According to the White House, illegal aliens and drugs, including deadly fentanyl, constitute a serious emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Until the crisis is alleviated, President Trump is implementing a 25% additional tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico and a 10% additional tariff on imports from China. Energy resources from Canada will have a lower 10% tariff.
Over the weekend, President Trump declared an economic emergency to impose 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico and a 10% tariff on China. The one exception is energy. This includes oil and natural gas from Canada. The tariff on that is going to be 10%.
President Trump is taking bold action to hold Mexico, Canada, and China accountable to their promises of halting illegal immigration and stopping poisonous fentanyl and other drugs from flowing into the United States. The orders make clear that the flow of contraband drugs like fentanyl to the United States through illicit distribution networks has created a national emergency, including a public health crisis. Chinese officials have failed to take the actions necessary to stem the flow of precursor chemicals to known criminal cartels and shut down money laundering by transnational criminal organizations.
From coast to coast in every corner of the U.S., deaths from fentanyl overdoses are soaring.
The fentanyl epidemic in the United States killed more than 72,000 people in 2022.
Most people who take fentanyl don't even know they're taking it. You can't see it, taste it, or smell it.
And we know that this global fentanyl supply chain, which ends with the deaths of Americans, often starts with chemical companies in China.
Fentanyl is a powerful synthetic opioid. Basically, it's a painkiller like morphine, but a lot of people are taking it recreationally.
Fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid that is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine and 30 to 50 times more potent than heroin, leads this epidemic.
This is enough to kill a person. So how exactly does it do that? A lot of how drugs affect people is how fast they get into the brain and how much gets in. Fentanyl's good at both. Your brain has things called opioid receptors, those normally taking chemicals your own brain makes to help you when you're, say, running a marathon. But fentanyl bypasses that system, floods the receptors, killing pain and easing anxiety. But fentanyl has side effects. For one, dopamine's released more easily. Dopamine's associated with reward, so it makes you feel really, really good. Drug users like that side effect, but other side effects can kill you quickly. Remember those opioid receptors? Well, you also have them in your brainstem. When those receptors get flooded, they tell the body to slow down its breathing. And because fentanyl is great at getting a lot of chemical into the brain really fast, those receptors can get overloaded easily. Too much chemical and the body turns off its natural breathing reflex. Breathing can stop within seconds. The person goes unconscious, and without help, they die.
Everyone knows how harmful drugs are, right? But do you know what is even more harmful? The rise of synthetic drugs produced in China. The abuse of Chinese synthetic drugs has reached alarming levels in the United States in recent years. These substances are causing the worst drug crisis in the history of the United States. More than 1,500 people per week die from taking some type of opioid, according to the National Center for Health Statistics, making opioids by far the leading cause of fatal overdoses in the country.
For example, in 2022, over 107,000 Americans died from overdoses in the United States, and fentanyl poisoning became the leading cause of death of Americans 18 to 45 years of age. A 2019 paper found that prescription opioids accounted for 44% of the decline in labor force participation among men.
Nearly 1 million people have died of drug overdose in the U.S. since 1999. Yet America is no closer to tackling the cause of the problem. In 2023, death rates topped 112,000 within a single year. Out of every 10 drug-related deaths, 7 are caused by opiates.
Today is the day that I saw my son dead. 4 years ago today, that is that day for me.
I can see what it's doing today. I mean, it's deteriorated my health and my body tremendously almost overnight.
Do you know how many families I know who had to declare bankruptcy because they put their loved ones through treatment?
The latest person to die is a 17-year-old.
Traffickers adding fentanyl to everything.
Fentanyl, that's the drug that contributed to his death.
It's being called a nationwide disaster.
The increased availability of this deadly drug has led to a surge in overdose deaths. China plays a critical role in the global supply chain of illicit fentanyl and its precursors. The country's large and rapidly growing chemical and pharmaceutical industries provide an easily accessible source of precursor chemicals needed for fentanyl production. These industries also offer a cover for illegal operations, as many fentanyl-producing laboratories are disguised as legitimate businesses to avoid detection.
Members of Congress are calling the influx of Chinese fentanyl an act of asymmetric war against the United States. The Drug Enforcement Agency estimates 90% of fentanyl comes from Chinese companies that not only operate legally inside of China, but are also subsidized and paid for by the Chinese Communist Party. China sends precursor chemicals, which are then processed and manufactured into synthetic opioids, by Mexican drug cartels that then smuggle them into the United States.
Fentanyl precursor chemicals are made in China.
It is not at all an area of dispute that China provides the fentanyl that comes into the United States.
In asymmetric warfare, one nation seeks to exploit the other's relative weakness. In this case, China's accused of exploiting America's appetite for illicit drugs and weaponizing fentanyl. When US President Donald Trump and China's President Xi Jinping engaged in an all-out trade war in 2018, the Chinese government then increased tax breaks and subsidized companies that were exporting fentanyl abroad to punish the United States. When Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in 2022, against China's wishes, they stopped all cooperation between Chinese and US law enforcement agencies that were working to fight fentanyl trafficking. It's clear the fentanyl crisis has become deeply ingrained in foreign diplomacy today. But the idea of weaponizing substances against an adversary is nothing new. Because if there was ever a country to understand the power of addiction in geopolitics, it's China. Qin Gang, China's former ambassador to the United States, said, quote, "The Opium War started a century of humiliation for China. Some Americans believe that China is the primary source of fentanyl in the United States. Some even fantasize that China's shipping fentanyl to the United States as a form of payback for the Opium Wars, and that North America has been flooded with precursor chemicals from China, stifling international efforts."
There's a little-known fact about some of the most common drugs Americans take, from antibiotics to heart medicine to antidepressants. 80% of the key ingredients used to make them come from overseas, mainly from China.
How much of our drug supply is controlled by China?
We're so dependent on China that if they shut the door on sending medicines to us, our hospitals would shut down within a couple of months.
In the case of some drugs, like antibiotics, China has a total stranglehold.
We can't make penicillin anymore. The last penicillin plant in the United States closed in 2004.
In March, a prominent Chinese economist suggested his country's control of the market could be used to send a message. If exports are reduced, he said, the medical systems of some Western countries will not run well.
Basically, we've outsourced our entire industry to China. That is a strategic vulnerability in and of itself.
John Adams is a retired brigadier general.
How are pharmaceuticals turned into weapons of war?
Pharmaceuticals are necessary for our warfighters. They're necessary for our population to remain healthy, to cure diseases. If those are either toxic or they're not available, we're going to get sick and we will die.
The U.S. and China are not at war, but there are tensions over trade. China's state-run paper said this week there's little chance the government would deliberately harm innocent Americans by cutting off the flow of antibiotics.
Well, trust is everything. And do we trust?
There have already been problems with contamination. In 2008, there were dozens of deaths tied to batches of the blood thinner heparin. And in the past year, more than 50 recalls of some of the most popular blood pressure medicines, contaminated in China and India with chemicals linked to cancer.
How did we get here? How did this happen?
We got here because it's cheap, because we look at the next quarter's profits.
The pressure for low-cost drugs pushed manufacturing to China.
We have to reinvest in making medicines here in the United States.
An expensive proposition that could drive drug prices up.
For commodities like oil and food, we would never put all of our production, all of our eggs in one basket in China. We shouldn't be doing that with our medicines.
Stephanie, the fact that we rely on China for drugs that Americans take and need every day is alarming. What can be done?
Well, the only way to regain control, Lester, is to move manufacturing back to the U.S. But experts tell us that private companies aren't going to do that on their own. They're going to need the federal government's help.
On the other hand, China claims the fentanyl crisis is entirely an American domestic issue that's being blamed on them. China claims Big Pharma's opioid corruption, weak U.S. laws, and a culture of American drug glorification are really to blame. This disagreement is a major problem for the world's two biggest economies.
In an intelligence report, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration stated that China remains the primary source of fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances trafficked through international mail, as well as the main source for all fentanyl-related substances trafficked into the United States. This view is maintained by many U.S. media reports, However, it's not the case.
他们在没有任何依据的情况下，仅仅依据个案这个有个别邮包是来自于中国的，其中检出了芬太尼类物质，那么他就说芬太尼类物质主要来自中国，这种说法是没有任何依据，而且就属于混淆视听。
Anti-drug laws in China are some of the strictest in the world. Depending on the quantity, those found guilty of making, selling, or smuggling drugs can have their property confiscated, face prison time, or even the death penalty.
Full of this stuff. And in China, they have a very, very tough penalty for drugs. It's called the death penalty. And I said to President Xi, you don't have much of a drug problem. Do you have a drug problem? No, no drug problem. I said, so you have 1.4 billion people and you don't have a drug problem. That's right, no drug problem. I said, what do you attribute that to? Death penalty, quick trial. They don't have trials that last 19 years. At the end of the judge dies, everybody dies. The only one living is the one that did the damage. They have what's called a quick trial.
Trafficking any amount of any kind of illegal drugs, including fentanyl in China, even if it's less than 1 gram, is punishable by law. Though there aren't many leads on fentanyl trafficking between China and US, Chinese authorities have taken the issue seriously and punished relevant criminals. In 2013, 13 types of fentanyl substances were already regulated in China, but from 2015, the Chinese government has been increasing the number of banned fentanyl substances. 6 new ones were added in 2015, 4 in 2017, and 2 fentanyl precursors in 2018, all done before the United Nations announced its recommendation to restrict those substances. Since 2018, the United States temporarily classified fentanyl analogs as controlled substances. But in 2019, alarmed by fentanyl abuse, China went one step ahead and regulated a wide net of fentanyl-related substances. To date, no evidence of the illegal export of fentanyl-related substances has been uncovered in China.
Allegedly, the Mexican drug trafficking organizations have an intolerable alliance with the government of Mexico.
Growing calls from Republicans to send the U.S. military into Mexico to combat drug cartels.
Attempts to stop this have failed, leading to calls for U.S. military intervention against Mexican cartels to stop the substance's devastating effects.
Mexico serves as a key transit point for the smuggling of fentanyl into the United States, with the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels heavily involved in the production and distribution of fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. These cartels operate clandestine laboratories in Mexico, where they synthesize fentanyl using precursor chemicals sourced from China. Once in Mexico, fentanyl is often combined with other substances, such as heroin, cocaine, or methamphetamine, to increase potency and profits. To smuggle fentanyl across the border, Mexican cartels use various methods, including hiding it in vehicles, using drug mules to carry it across on foot, or even mailing it directly to recipients in the United States. Cartels have also been known to produce counterfeit prescription pills containing fentanyl, which are then sold to unsuspecting users who may be unaware of the presence of the dangerous synthetic opioid. These counterfeit pills are increasingly being seized in large quantities, contributing to the worsening opioid epidemic in the United States.
The government of Mexico has afforded safe havens for the cartels to engage in the manufacturing and transportation of dangerous narcotics, which collectively have led to the overdose deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans. America sees this alliance as a danger to national security, hence prioritizing elimination of the cartels. There is also a growing presence of Mexican cartels operating fentanyl and nitazene synthesis labs in Canada, which is part of the reason why Canada was hit with the tariffs.
This is what police say Mexican drug cartels are slipping into Canada. $83 million worth of cocaine, destined for every corner of the country, and recently traced to a murderous cartel making inroads here. In a new pledge, the Prime Minister announced Ottawa will list cartels as terrorists, just one of the efforts to ward off U.S. tariffs, as the Trump administration issues this fresh warning.
The Mexican drug cartels are rapidly expanding in Canada, and that's a danger.
Cartels are known to smuggle truckloads of drugs across the U.S. border and into Canada. But a recent bust in BC suggests they're also producing enough here to send abroad. At this super lab, police say the chemicals seized would have amounted to nearly 100 million doses of fentanyl.
Canada is naming 7 Mexican drug cartels as terrorist groups, making good on a pledge to U.S. President Donald Trump. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised a string of border measures to delay U.S. tariffs, including going after those Mexican cartels. It will now be illegal for these 7 cartels and street gangs to recruit, travel, and access finance. This designation gives law enforcement additional powers, including to track, trace, disrupt, and interrupt terrorism financing.
I'm here today, as you heard, with Superintendent Paul McIntyre of Organized Crime Enforcement, Toronto Police, members of the Toronto Police Drug Squad, and the Solicitor General of Ontario, the Honourable Michael Kersner. Thank you all for joining us here today. In front of me is the culmination of incredible police work and teamwork that resulted in the largest seizure of cocaine in the history of the Toronto Police Service. 835 kilograms of cocaine that is alleged to have the hallmarks of coming from the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. What you see before you has an estimated street value of $83 million. This is the result of Project Castillo, an extensive joint forces investigation into drug importation and trafficking in the Greater Toronto Area. The investigation was led by the Toronto Police Service Drug Squad Major Projects, with the assistance from other partners, including the York Regional Police Service, the Canada Border Services Agency, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Windsor Border Integrity Unit, and the Criminal Intelligence Service, Ontario.
According to the White House, access to the American market is a privilege. The United States has one of the most open economies in the world and the lowest average tariff rates in the world. While trade accounts for 67% of Canada's GDP, 73% of Mexico's GDP, and 37% of China's GDP, it accounts for only 24% of America's GDP. However, in 2023, the U.S. trade deficit in goods was the world's largest at over $1 trillion. President Trump faults the previous administration for failing to use America's privilege in the global market to protect her interests. President Trump was massively elected on the whole campaign of sealing the border from both aliens and drugs, and that is what the tariffs are meant to achieve. The president and his supporters blame Biden's administration for the worst border crisis in American history, including a rise in the number of Chinese nationals and people in the terror watch list.
I think the only thing that people in the United States and politicians can agree about on immigration is that the system is broken.
I think it's gotten more broken, if that's possible, in the 30 years that I've been working on the issue.
2023 saw record-breaking numbers of migrant crossings at the southwestern border, with Border Patrol reporting nearly 250,000 encounters in December alone.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done.
I will not demonize immigrants saying they are poisoning the blood of our country.
The migration that we're seeing happening at the border right now is unsustainable. We are not managing it, and it is overwhelming our existing immigration systems.
There's broad consensus that it needs to be fixed. I just can't agree on what that way might be and how to think about that question.
When people say that the immigration system is broken, they mean different things. If you're on the left, you typically mean that the system does not accommodate as many people as you would like to be able to come here legally. And when people use it from the conservative side, they mean that the system allows in far too many people who should not be here under any definition of the law.
The U.S. has more foreign-born residents than any other country, with immigrants accounting for about 13.7% of the entire population. But today, less than 1% of those looking to reside permanently in the U.S. can do so legally.
The federal government won't stop them at the border.
You spend $5.5 billion a year to support them.
There's a right way and there's a wrong way.
At the time, there were around 5 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. And most Americans saw immigrants as a burden on the country, taking jobs, housing, and healthcare, and thought immigration as a whole should be decreased.
Our country is invaded by immigrants who are like cancer cells.
That same year, Republicans ran on a tough-on-immigration platform and took control of Congress. Democrats were pushed to adopt tough positions on immigration, too.
We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws.
In 1996, President Bill Clinton signed a major piece of legislation, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, or IRA-IRA. Its goal was to decrease the number of undocumented immigrants. Before 1996, the threat of deportation was relatively low. People were commonly deported for committing a crime, and it was mostly limited to major crimes like murder or trafficking. But IRA-IRA, together with other 1996 laws, drastically expanded deportable crimes to even minor infractions like shoplifting. Deportations skyrocketed, and IRA-IRA created the framework for future laws that further expanded reasons people could be deported, especially after 9/11. Before IRA-IRA, Mexican immigrants who came to the U.S. unlawfully were about 50% likely to return to Mexico within a year. But after 1996, more people started staying in the U.S. There were around 5 million undocumented immigrants living at the U.S. before IRA-IRA. Today, it's at least double that.
Military deportation flights are the most visible sign of Donald Trump's hard turn on immigration. Up to 80 Guatemalan migrants were removed from the U.S. by Air Force transport Thursday. Though similar flights happened regularly under President Joe Biden, Trump's decision to use military aircraft is new, part of a strategy that will also see thousands of troops deployed to the border. In Juarez, Mexico, dozens of Mexican migrants were also returned from the U.S. Everyone is getting caught. I don't recommend to cross, says this man.
We're getting the bad, hard criminals out. These are murderers. These are people that have been as bad as you get, as bad as anybody you've seen. We're taking them out first.
It's not clear what specific crimes the first Trump-era deportees committed.
All right, recent data from Customs and Border Protection shows apprehensions along the southern border from January 21st through the 31st were down 85% from the same period last year. Border Patrol recorded nearly 30,000 apprehensions of migrants who crossed the southern border unlawfully last month. I'm curious, given how forceful President Trump campaigned on this issue, the force by which he has decreed what he intends to do in terms of arrests and returns back to home origin, the countries where some of these migrants are coming from. I wonder if that's serving as a deterrent. I note that the number of deportations is about the same, but if people are deterred by what the president is saying, is that playing into this? Well, look, Vlad, multiple things can be true. It is true, on one hand, that illegal crossings here along the U.S.-Mexico border have been going down for the better part of the last year after soaring to record levels under the Biden administration in 2022 and 2023. And officials at the time credited the Biden administration's asylum restrictions from last year, as well as legal pathways that allowed people to come here legally in an attempt to discourage them from crossing this border behind us illegally, as well as Mexico's efforts to interdict and stop migrants. But now it is also true that illegal crossings have fallen even further since President Trump took office in January, and obviously Trump administration officials, rather, are crediting their dramatic and sweeping crackdown on illegal immigration for that even further reduction in illegal crossings. In fact, illegal crossings here, Vlad, are now down more than 90% from the same time last year. And over the weekend, the Department of Homeland Security reported the lowest single-day tally in migrant crossings in over 15 years. So there has been a sharp, dramatic reduction in illegal crossings, and Trump administration officials would say that that is due to their policies, which now include an order that essentially allows agents here, Vlad, to summarily deport people across this border or to their home countries without allowing them to request asylum, which, as you know, traditionally has been a legal right for migrants who are physically on American soil.
Immigration issues are not restricted to the southern border with Mexico, although it appears to be the most sensitive and the most notable area of concern as the northern border with Canada is also implicated.
But the numbers are staggering when I took a look at this. Across the southern border, they've gone up from 16,000 to 42,000 in over a 3-month period, comparing the end of 2022 to 2021. And this one sector right around Vermont, New York, New Hampshire, they've gone up by over 700%. And that's where that picture is from. That's a family carrying an 8-month-old baby and a 2-year-old and negative 4-degree temperature.
So
this
do
was
they
just
fly?
5 days ago.
Do they fly from Mexico
so they're flying,
up to like Toronto?
And it's legal for them to do that because the visa rules are different. And the flights are about $350. And if you think about families who are paying $5,000 to be smuggled across a northern border, that's not nearly as expensive. They are still paying some smugglers. So, of course, people are cashing in on this. They're paying about $2,000 to be smuggled in that way. But oftentimes they're not prepared for those temperatures. Who would be? Negative 4 degrees, hypothermia sets in so quickly. Look how young some of these children are. Look at where they are, really remote areas. They're told to keep going. They'll find someone in a car at the other side of the border. But the Border Patrol there says they're really finding a lot of people with hypothermia. And the issue here is that for Mexicans in particular, it is so hard to cross a border right now. You hear about some other nationalities maybe getting in, but with Title 42, the largest nationality that's pushed back into Mexico are Mexicans that make up 60% of those rejected. But it's a lot easier for them to get in from Canada.
Under the cover of darkness, people emerging from a vehicle after it pulls up to a gas station in Plattsburgh, a city in Clinton County, New York. It's located more than 300 miles from New York City and less than 30 miles from the Canadian border.
Hi, sir. Where are you coming from? I'm a journalist. Where are you coming from? You came from Canada?
My questions met with silence.
Tell us where you're coming from.
Reluctance.
Ma'am, where are you coming from? Can you tell me?
And refusal.
No. No, you don't want to talk?
They start walking away, and we follow them.
Sir, can we talk to you? Can you tell me where you're coming from? I'm a journalist. We're doing a story on people crossing the border.
We are coming from India.
Can you show me the documents?
No, ma'am.
The letterhead identifies the document at a glance. It's from the federal government, the kind of document given to asylum seekers.
What did they say to you?
After crossing the border illegally.
At the border, what did they say?
Nothing.
You crossed the border, the Canadian border?
Yes.
How long did it take to walk across the border?
Ma'am, this is the main person is this.
Okay, one more question. Are you going to New York City?
Yeah.
And that's how we finally confirmed where at least one of them is going. The gas station is called Mountain Mart. It's also a bus stop here in upstate New York, and we've confirmed well known around here as a meeting place for migrants after crossing the northern border. About 20 miles from here and closer to Canada, the town of Champlain, where town supervisor Thomas Tremblay regularly deals with complaints from people about migrants on their property.
To me, it's like a back door.
A back door into the United States, he says. While our eyes look at the flow of people crossing the southern border, here locals will tell you an alternate route into the U.S. through Canada is becoming more popular for people who are desperate to get into the country. The pursuit of the American dream has long been documented as the fuel for the illegal journey countless migrants keep making into the U.S. While the focus has long been on the porous southern border, our camera is pointed north as we move through a part of northeast New York in Clinton County, right by the northern border's edge. Here, instead of walls and fences, you can find open land. Border barriers like these cement blocks are few and far between. Canadian law enforcement confirming human smugglers are behind it all. And like at the southern border, transnational crime is part of the whole picture.
We have relevant intelligence that the Mexican cartels are involved in human smuggling operations in Canada. We've known that for quite some time. So we do know that the Mexican cartels are involved in this, but there are also other organized crime group. Some of them are located here in Canada, and we have active investigations to uncover that. Who's behind it?
Stretching more than 5,500 miles, the northern border is the longest land border in the world, more than twice as long as the southern border.
The sustained influx of illegal aliens has profound consequences on every aspect of America's national life, overwhelming schools, lowering wages, reducing housing supply and raising rents, overcrowding hospitals, draining the welfare system, and seeing a surge in criminal. The White House reports that over the last fiscal year, Customs and Border Protection apprehended more than 21,000 pounds of fentanyl crossing American borders, enough fentanyl to kill more than 4 billion people, with this only being a fraction of what actually gets in. These drugs kill tens of thousands of Americans each year, including 75,000 deaths per year attributed to fentanyl alone, more than those America lost in the entirety of the Vietnam War.